My name is Richard Ferrer, and I can say I am cloud hired.
That yes, come and join and get cloud hired. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
Hey, Go Cloud Architect family. I'm cloud hired.
So I'm cloud hired, guys.
So I'll just say I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired thanks to Go Cloud Architects.
It worked for me, and now I'm cloud hired. Because of Go Cloud Architect program, I am cloud hired. See!
I am cloud hired. Thank you, Mike and the Glow Cloud team.
Sounds like your mic is muted, Mike.
Yes, apparently my apologies for that. So welcome everyone. This is Mike Gibbs. I am joined by Mark Milovanovic and Mo, who's a good friend, an incredible network architect. And today we're going to talk about the CCIE certification, more specifically, how to pass the CCIE certification and any other certification you possibly ever desire. The CCIE is by far the most difficult of any IT certification. We will talk about some CCIE exam tips, and the tips that we give you to pass the CCIE exam will make other exams really easy for you, because it's by far more complicated to pass the CCIE than it is almost any other exam that's out there. We will talk about how to study for the CCIE, but guess what? If you're taking an exam like the AWS Solutions Architect Professional, the CCIE exam tips we give you will make that real easy for you. I mean, real easy by comparison. And we'll talk about the journey of some CCIEs. We'll talk about why the CCIE is really the best intro-level networking certification in the entire world. So we'll get involved in a lot of those things. So let's have some fun today. I have to tell you about my panel. We have 3 CCIEs. I'm a CCIE from the beginning of time. My number is 7417, back when it was a 2-day exam. I am joined by Mark and Mo that are part of the new generation of tech leaders and new CCIEs. They took like version 5 of the exam. But the point is, it's been a lot of time. There are so many things that we can talk about. And it's not just the perspective that we want to talk about of the CCIE. We'll talk about what it is. We'll talk about what it did for us, what it could do for others. But also it's those key lessons learned that truthfully made every other exam to me silly easy. After the CCIE, I passed the CISSP exam in a matter of days because of what I had to learn to do. When I took the Google Professional Cloud Architect, I prepared for it for days, not even a week, but days. Because I'd learned how to learn. I learned how to pass big exams, and I learned how to learn for the rest of my career. And a lot of that started with the CCIE. So, Mark or Mo, do you want to say anything before we begin?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Mo Bugazia. I'm CCIE 62901. Welcome to this talk. As you're going to see, the 3 of us took the exam at different times, different exam versions, and the 3 of us took completely different study strategies, different study material, and you will learn that there are some common denominators. There are things that every successful CCIE candidate has taken. And also you'll get a different nuances of every training strategy, and hopefully you'll find a strategy that works for you. So I'm very excited to have you on this talk.
Yeah, those were very good points, Mo. And we hope what we can really impart with you guys, besides just a strategy on how to learn the technology, is to really understand that what makes the CCIE certification. It doesn't matter if this is now the enterprise, if it's data center, so forth, but really what sets it apart, because a lot of people, what they don't realize, and you'll get Mo's perspective, Mike's perspective, my perspective on this, is what do you need to do to get your life in order to be able to dedicate time for this kind of certification? Something that I'm very passionate about, and you'll hear me talk about, is in regards to what type of mental state do you need to get into and remain in so that you can even pursue the CCIE as you go through it, because there is going to be little bumps or skyscrapers on the on your path of trying to get this. So hopefully you'll gather these nuggets, learn that you can apply this to all types of avenues when it comes to life in general, but especially certifications, regardless if they're going to be networking related or if they're going to be cloud related, or even, let's say, if you want to do security, whichever it may be, you'll see that you'll gather some type of gold nugget from it that's going to help you in your journey. And since everybody else gave them a number, my CCIE number is 65,344. So I'm actually the young kid on the block, so to say, this time around. And I'm also curious to see what Mike's experience was like, what Mo's experience was like, and how that shaped them going forward.
Absolutely. So before we begin, let's talk about some free things we have for you. We have a completely free AWS Solutions Architect Associate Bootcamp coming in the next few weeks. We will cover the entire Certified Solution Architect Associate exam, many of the new AI machine learning services from Amazon, some of the content from the AWS Advanced Networking, and a little bit from the AWS Security Advanced Certification, all in there. And that should give you some good, strong fundamentals. We have about 3 times the content than we have from previous bootcamp. Our team is behind the scenes creating a tremendous amount of hands-on labs for people to do. So we're excited about it, and it's free. I also want to tell you that on Thursday, we have our How to Get Your First Cloud Architect Job webinar. And I will tell you, it's been really fun over the years getting people hired at Apple, at Amazon, and Cisco, and IBM, and Microsoft, and Google, and Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, Capgemini, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Barclays Bank, JP Morgan Chase Bank, Zscaler, you name it, all of them. And I love watching people get hired. So whether you train with us or not, at least join us for the free webinar, and you will know what you need to be to become a great cloud architect and the real skills you need versus the skills that people think you need, because they're not the same. And we also have a document on passing your CCIE exam, and please go down and get that. And if you haven't checked out the video on AI architect interview questions, we released it yesterday, so make sure you get to see that. So first thing I want to talk about is, what is the CCIE exam and why is it so hard? Actually, before we do, everybody give me a hashtag CCIE. So here's the difference between the CCIE exam and the rest of the exams. And we'll all talk about our experience with it. Regular exams, you memorize some questions, you can memorize some answers, and if you don't know anything, you can still pass the exam. And it happens all the time. For example, I interviewed 1,000 people that asked AWS certifications and asked them, what is cloud computing? Asked them to explain storage area networks to me. Asked them to explain a hypervisor to me and how it worked. Guess what? Almost no one could answer. And it's the difference between the CCIE and the rest. And I don't care if you don't want to be in networking. If you learn it the CCIE way, whatever you do, you'll have a great career. So what is special about it? There's an exam to take the exam. So there's an exam that I'd say it's a little more difficult than the AWS Solutions Architect Professional, and that is a qualification exam. You have to pass that exam. And if you pass that exam, then you're allowed to schedule your CCIE certification. There's typically a 6-month wait. It's at least, when I took it, it was $1,000, but the CCIE exam is more than that. And you had to go fly somewhere, like San Jose or Raleigh, to go take the exam. Now, when I took the exam, it was a 2-day exam. I'll tell you, most of the people passed the qualification exam. That's the one that's like the AWS Solutions Architect Professional. That was the qualification. And then you got to the exam. And now they actually asked you to design something. And they would give you wacky requirements. please make sure that you can create a multi-point interface. And on the multi-point interface, you must make sure that routing advertisements are sent out the same interface that it's in on. And you must use a distance vector protocol like IGRP or RIP v2. And they would do that. And the reason I say that is the only way you could ever make that work would be to disable something called split horizon, which is a loop avoidance strategy. And they wanted you to know that you had to do that. And then you were going to break systems because you asked the routing protocols to break their loop avoidance strategies. And what do you need to do to tune the network because they ask you to do something wrong? So it had a lot of design. And in order to pass that design, your fundamentals had to be really deep because they would ask wacky questions. And then you'd have to build it. Now, when I took it, day one was building. And I can tell you what it reminded me like. You walked in, there were about 15 people in the room. They were all excited. They were going to become CCIEs and make a lot of money. Because when I took the CCIEs were earning about $100 to $150 an hour. That was 30 years ago. So $150 an hour 30 years ago is about $400 or $500 an hour today. So everybody was excited. They're going to pass the CCIE and they're going to make a lot of money. And then at the end of the second day, you walked in and basically 14 out of the 15 people were escorted out of the building. And now you're the one left, if you happen to be the one left on your CCIE. And you'd take the exam in the morning, meaning you'd have to build something. And then in those days, you would go to lunch. And 80% of the people still wouldn't continue. They'd have failed there. But if they passed that next section, you came back from lunch and one of the CCIEs who worked for Cisco would break your systems and you'd have to figure out how to fix them. So you had to know everything. If they said, for example, and this was the difference, mine would say you need to bridge your mainframe traffic across an IP network. First, you had to know that you needed data link switching plus to do it, for example. And then you needed to know what it was and how to make it work and how to do it. Or they would say that you need OSPF and you need to allow external routes in, but you can't have any type 5 LSAs inside of your area. So you can see that's not like a multiple choice exam saying, what is the IP address that OSPF multicast to? 224.0.0.5, 224.0.0.6, 239.1234, or A and B. So, that's easy when they give you the information. Here, you basically had to know the entire library. You had to know every routing protocol. You needed to know every specification. They'd ask you to design something, and then they'd ask you to build it. So that was why it was so hard. And that was the reason it had a 90% failure rate. It's the reason that millions of people that are Cisco certified never made it. It's the reason that after 30 years of the CCIE, there's about 65,000 in the entire world because it's that hard. And basically what the CCIE is, because you had to design it and then you had to build it, it was the rubber stamp of approval from Cisco that says, this person knows enough to hire. Now, I'll tell you, I still think the CCIE was my intro to networking. And I'll tell you why I think it was my intro to networking, and then I'm going to turn it to Mark and Mo. It was my intro to networking for the following reasons. Before the CCIE, I didn't even know what I didn't know. I thought I knew something, but I didn't. I passed the CCNA. I know networking. This is great. I passed the CCNP. I'm like, well, this networking thing's a little bigger than I thought. I passed the CCIE and went, oh my God, I don't know anything. There's all this stuff out there, and I'm going to need to spend a lot of time. And I spent the next 25 years after the CCIE learning. And what was the CCIE to me? It was the intro ticket. It was the ticket to the big boys and girls table where you get invited to the big project. And right after my CCIE, Mike, could you design the system for the largest market maker on NASDAQ? Mike, could you design this internet service providers network? Mike, could you consult to this internet service provider? And there was where I was forced to do things that nobody had ever done before. That's where I learned. So CCIE was my admission ticket. It was like the gold, platinum, and diamond ticket that says you're welcome here. How about you, Mo or Mark? Mo, starting with you. What did you think about the exam? What kind of preparation? How much did you need to spend to do it? How long? Martin, you're muted, Mo. How many CCIEs can't remember how to press the mute and unmute button? I'm the first victim today.
Okay, can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. Sorry about that. So I want to go back to the point you just mentioned, Mike, that the CCIE is a introductory or your introduction to the field. That's when you really, and my point I want to make is that CCIE alone does not make you an expert. Not the CCIE alone. The experience is what really makes you an expert. And I think Mike would agree with me, and Mark as well, is that there's a lot of experts out there that don't have the CCIE. So you got to keep that in mind. But when a hiring manager looks at somebody with two people with the same expertise and one person has a CCIE, then it definitely, that CCIE carries a lot of weight and it pays your career dividends. I think the three of us can attest to that. And
Yes.
so it is a very, very, very highly technical exam, right? You need to know design. You need to know how things work together. That's just part of understanding the technology, right? You can't just know what is it, how to build it, but actually what is that technology and how does it work and why you should use it. Those are really important information because the way that those questions are formulated in those labs is they would not they would not necessarily ask you directly to do something a certain way, but they would say, this is the solution, fix it or build it, and these are your restrictions. So there's a lot of restrictions, right? Another point why does not necessarily make you an expert in the field is because a lot of these scenarios are not necessarily real world. I would argue say they're more difficult than real world because those limitations, those technology stacks that you would use, you would never want to design a network that complex, right? You want your network to be simple, right? Because complexity, as we like to say, complexity kills. So you have to kill complexity. And so you have to keep things simple. But in the exam, it's going to be as difficult as you can imagine, right? And so that's something that you need to keep in mind.
Completely agree with you, Mo. How about you, Mark?
So
was it
I'll
intro
touch
level
on
for
it.
you too?
Sort of. I put it that way. I had the pleasure of working for an MSP prior to joining Go Cloud Careers, and I saw a lot of different technologies, and that's really the benefit when you work for a service provider or managed service provider. Customers are not aligned towards certifications. Really, that's not what it is. A customer, as we always talk about on this channel, have specific needs because they're trying to accomplish something with the organization, with their business, with their resources. So I already was somewhat exposed to a lot of these things that we would consider fundamentals. But what the CCIE did is really help me appreciate that there is hard and then there's brutal. And to me, the CCIE was just simply a brutal exam. It's not an exam that was designed for the average mortal in that sense. You almost had to have, almost take some pleasure in the pain that awaits you. Because, just like if you take like a design, there's always going to be trade-offs. Same thing here. You want to pursue something like a CCIE, there's going to be trade-offs, and we can get into them a lot. But because of the breadth that the CCIE had, and I think that's not what a lot of people sometimes pay attention to. They simply think it's switching, routing, some overlay VPN technology, and you're good to go. That's not really what the exam is all about. The exam is about how do you make all these things work in interconnection. That's why it's called the inter-network expert, right? So how do all these pieces fit together? How do you make them work? And like Mo mentioned, you're talking about an 8-hour exam. At least when we took it, it was the single day. I know you had the 2-day exam, and then I really thought they were cool on your side. On the second day, you came in if you were allowed. Then you even had to pass towards lunch, and then if you passed lunch, then you could finish up, right? We didn't have that. They were cruel in different ways for us. They made you stay the entire day. Fail, pass, you didn't know. You had to suffer throughout the entire ordeal. But it's emotionally stressful. It is physically stressful. The breadth and the depth of the exam You didn't really know what to expect. You had people that could come up with all types of ways, because remember, it's not a production-based best practices exam. So you can have anyone sit there and think, what exact knob can I turn on this particular routing protocol? What can I change in particular when it comes to creating a DMVPN tunnel? Do I want to use OSPF? Do I use BGP? If they were really cruel, they could think about, okay, well, BGP, should we make it a dynamic peering relationship or should it be static? Some people didn't even know you could do dynamic peering relationships with BGP, but you can. So those are all the different things that you can have somebody, almost like if they're bored, just sit there and decide how they're going to test you. So from that perspective, what it really did, and this is why I would agree with you that it's somewhat of an intro to technology, is you don't know what you don't know. And this exam really opens your eyes of what you don't know. I gave sometimes on some of the Q&A, I gave this analogy that it's like climbing Mount Everest, and you finally make it to the top and you want to be excited, right? You're huffing, you're puffing, and the next thing you look up and you figure out, hey, this was just one peak. There's 1,000 other peaks I can go to and learn something, right? So from that perspective, yes, it's an intro to networking, and it's an intro to technology in the sense that it helps you appreciate that there's so much more to learn in really it's a vast landscape that we have in technology, right? We have cloud, we have security, we got collaboration, voice, video, we got data centers, virtualization. So to me, that was the eye-opening. And if you guys don't mind affording me a little bit, something else that makes the exam challenging besides the breadth and the depth is timing. We're talking about an exam that if you gave people maybe a week, the actual passing rate might actually go higher, but they give you 8 hours, right? And then at least they did for us. For you, I think, was it 8 hours days, 2 Mikes? You got
2 8-hour days, yes.
2 8-hour days, okay. So you got this limited time frame, and I can tell you from my personal experience, what you're trying to do within that limited time frame should really take a week. Should really take a week. This is not something that you should be capable of doing in a day. And we're living proof that if you train hard enough,
you can, and
you train specific things, this is not just learning technology, you can accomplish it. But that's what makes this so tough: the depth, the breadth, and the time limitation. So that's my opinion on the CCIE examination.
So I want to go down something that Mark said, because it's the biggest mistake people make in their careers. When we start out, we don't know what we don't know.
Yep.
And when I did mine, and I'll tell you why we all did it, my CCIE cost me $40,000 and it paid for itself in a few months. Mo, how much did you, and I'll tell you why mine cost more than Mo's in a second. Mo, what did you spend on yours? Approximately?
I have the number written somewhere. I was just looking for it, but I think it was upwards of $27,000, not including the physical equipment that I actually purchased. I'm talking training material.
And Mark, you did it the most economical way.
Oh yeah.
What was yours? About 10,000, 15,000?
At best, yeah. And I'll explain a little bit later why mine was like that. I always say that was my, well, I can't really say it on air, but that was my frugal side that came out. But mine included quite a bit of preparation. But we'll go down that road in a little bit. I'll explain.
We'll go down that road in a middle bit. But the key is, we knew we needed other people to help us. Mm-hmm. We knew we couldn't train ourselves to be like a physician on our own, which gave us two things. It taught us the need to get training because we knew we didn't know what we didn't know. And it taught us how to get the right kind of training and the right kind of information. I'll give you an example. When I started my CCIE, everybody was talking about this exam. Oh, you got to know this. And they gave you the wrong information. If I tell you that 90% of the people that gave me advice gave me wrong advice, it was all wrong. Now, the good news is, I come from medicine. In medicine, we're taught, you don't go to an internet forum. You don't get your information there. You get it from peer-reviewed journals, recommended text, recommended places. So I knew not to rely on that stuff. So, It forced you. You wanted to learn the routing protocol. You went to the Cisco press books, Routing TCP/IP Volumes 1 and 2 via Jeff Doyle. You read things like Internet Routing Architecture from Bassam Halabi's, but you went and you read the individual RFCs, all of them. I mean, you knew every specification and every single message that was sent because you needed that on the exam. So you went to the source. You went to the RFCs. You read all the books. Mine was about 75,000 pages of reading, and I took training. I took training that was done in Fort Lauderdale. It was 11 days taught by a CCIE in person so I could ask questions. Cisco had some gold partner training that I flew out to San Jose on the Cisco's campus and took. I took some additional training from another school. And in those days, I couldn't buy the networking gear because it was so expensive, and they didn't have EVE-NG servers. So I literally had to rent a rack of routers every Saturday and Sunday. It was $200 each day, and I did it for 6 months straight. So yes, I spent the most, but I'll tell you why I did it. I knew the average salary is between $100 and $150 for a CCIE in those days. I knew that if I borrowed money from my brother that I didn't have, got an extra credit card, which I didn't have, take an extra personal loan, my salary could go from like $85,000 to $285,000 almost overnight. So I front-ended the money, and I said, look, I can do it longer. I can do it in 2 years on my own and probably spend $10,000. But I'll earn $85,000 this year instead of $285,000 this year and next year. Or I can buy the right training, spend the $40,000 that I don't have, get my $300,000 job basically a year later, 6 months later, as it was for me, pay for the entire $40,000 off like nothing, and then have a higher income that I could use for the rest of my career. That was the key factor for me, was I knew I didn't know what I didn't know. I only knew that because I came from another field like medicine, where it's like no matter how much time and effort and money you spend training, there's still more that you don't know. And I took that approach to the CCIE. I got the training. I read everything that the Cisco thing read. The Cisco was on the curriculum. And I asked other CCIEs that had passed the exam, what other books and or materials did you find helpful? It wasn't the rumors that were circulating by the people trying to take the CCIE or the CCNAs that were out there that were studying for their CCNE. It was actual CCIEs. And how many CCIEs existed when I took mine? My number 7417, they started counting at 1,028 because it was 2 to the 10th, and the Cisco people thought that was cool. So 6,400 people of the millions that had attempted to become a CCIE at the time. So I knew if they passed it, they knew something. So that was there. And you know something else that I really loved? You know, the CCIE forced you to do something else, which is the second biggest mistake people get in their career. What most people do is they don't understand. You passed an associate exam, you probably don't have the skills for the job. And many people get 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 associate exams, all in different people's careers. So they don't have the skills to do any job in anybody's career. Now they're 6X AWS certified, but unhireable. The CCIE was so hard that I remember doing it. My friend Nagaraja Bayandar, he's a CCIE now as well. We were CCIE study buddies. He wanted to learn security, and I wanted to learn voice. And neither one of us could learn anything about security or anything about voice during the time that we prepared for our CCIEs. Because if we diverted our focus just a bit, even a little bit, we would have taken the time, our focus off of the CCIEs. And maybe we passed another certification, but we failed the CCIE, which was the king and the queen of all the certifications. So it forced focus. And that forced focus forced you to get and forced training because you didn't know what you were going to take. But I got to tell you, I know people that have taken that CCIE exam 5 and 6 and 7 times. You got to look at it this way. If it's in those days, it was $1,000, which is the equivalent of like $2,000 to $3,000 of today's money. You had to book a hotel, you had to book a flight, you had to rent a car, and you had meals. So if you failed that test, even in those days, 6 times, you were dealing with $2,000 to $3,000 each attempt. And if you filed it 5 times at $2,000 each, that's $10,000, which is like $30,000 today, just on taking the exam. And who wants to lose that kind of money? So we were all like, okay, I need training. Now, Mark, and he can talk to you, took the slow path. He was trying to spend less on training. I said, I'm going to earn more if I pass this. I don't care what it takes to pass this. I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it now. both approaches are valuable. It all depends where you're coming from, and it all depends. I'm a strategist, so I focus on strategy. The rest of my family might do it a little differently. There is no right or wrong. So that's what I learned. So, but let's take a lesson from this for anybody passing an exam. When Mark or me or Mo, we read, say, a book called Internet Routing Architectures talking about BGP. We all read it. If there was any part of that book we didn't understand, then we went to the Internet Engineering Task Force. We read their RFCs. Then we read the book that Jeff Doyle was writing on BGP. Then we checked this thing out. Then we looked at it. So we were constantly searching for the best and brightest sources of information. You want to do a CISSP? Awesome. It's a great certification. You read the book for the CISSP curriculum. You take a course from people that have passed the CCIE exam that know better. And when you read that CCIE curriculum, which is really wide, it's not very deep, for everything that's in that, you go dive deeper. And you, for example, if they discuss, WPA3 encryption, and you want to focus on wireless security, maybe you read 1,000 pages on WPA3 encryption versus just, the touch of it. So the focus, the hardness, the challenges, and going back to it, it's the old-fashioned supply and demand curve. If nobody can pass it, and you can, and there's a demand for it, you're going to get paid really well because most people do the easy things. Very few people actually take the challenges. So we'll talk about how that actually relates to hiring managers soon, because hiring managers love this exam for several reasons. But let's go to Mo and then Mark.
Okay. Mark, do you want me to speak more about the value of the CCIE, or do you want us to go more into the process of preparing?
Talk about the value a little bit, because I think that would be very valuable for everybody, because the value is going to be dependent on how you perceive it, and then as well as how it's going to be perceived by other people in your organization. Perhaps you can give your opinion, your experience. I'll give mine, because I think it's going to be a little bit different there.
Yeah, because I wanted to give the contrast on that as well. So I think one of the main benefits of the CCIE, and I'll start with, in my opinion, the most important to maybe the least important. I think the first or the most important, the biggest benefit of the CCIE is the knowledge that you gain from passing the exam, the confidence you gain from having that knowledge and actually went through that very rigorous and hard process, right? We always like to say that in the CCIE, I know it might sound cliche, but it really is about the journey, not about the final destination, right?
Yes.
And you learn more about yourself, more about, of course, about the field, and you gain a more appreciation of this field. Now, so I think that's the biggest value, right? And then, and I've seen people who are very shy, not confident people, right? But then when they start talking about technology, it's like they transcend. They're completely different people, right? They come to life. And I think that's one of the biggest things that you can get from the CCIE, right? You can speak to hundreds of people and you're confident because you know exactly what you're talking about. You know what you're talking about. I think that's a huge factor or a huge benefit to the CCIE, right? So the person
instant credibility, right? That's what you mean?
Yes.
When you walk in the room?
So not just the instant credibility, but how you feel about yourself, right? You're more confident because you know what you're talking about, right? Now, the second thing is Mark just said, right? You get the instant credibility or reputation, right? CCIEs have a strong reputation to this day. And so when you pass the CCIE, right, people are going to be more biased to believe that you're an expert and that you know what you're talking about. And I've experienced that firsthand, right? When I passed the CCIE, even when I was studying for the CCIE, because people knew, because I was walking with my big books, my big TCP/IP books, and the Routing TCP/IP Volume 1 and Volume 2, and people were always asking me like, "Wow, what's that book?" And that gave you some reputation. That's a reputation of you having going through that process, right? And then the other thing, the third benefit, I believe, is the connections that you make, right? People who are taking the CCIE are typically people who are have advanced in their career, and they're in a very high level in their career, and then they can vouch for you if they studied with you, right? So they can vouch that you understand the material. And that's actually how I've got the first job in the US. And I got verbally offered that job before I was even in the US, right? I didn't have a visa to get here. And a manager that I used to study with already, told me that you have a place at our company once you're here, right? And he did follow up on that promise. And so you also get that benefit as well, right? And then again, this CCIE, gives you the knowledge, right? Gives you the certificate itself, right? Because again, when we talk about the CCIE, we always think about the process. We don't think about the certificate, right?
Right.
And so, but the certificate can, as we say, it can give you a seat at the table, right? But you still have to prove yourself, right? Once you're there, once you get your foot through the door and you get that interview, you still have to prove that you have that knowledge. And that's why it's really, really important to focus on the journey, the process of actually learning, right? You learn some time management skills, right? You learn to think long term. So those are really important benefits of passing the CCIE or taking that journey.
Absolutely. And Mo, we're going to Mark next, but I'm going to come back to something that you said. I'm going to give you the employer perspective of what we see when a CCIE walks in the door. You got it from the networking perspective. Mo's a great network architect. I could recommend him to be anywhere. He's fantastic, honestly. But I want to show you the employer side of it next. But let's go to Mark next, and then we'll talk about the employer version. Because remember, there's your perspective, and there's the employer's perspective. And you should be more concerned about the employer's perspective when you're seeking your job. He's seen it. I have a CCIE. The world wants to talk to me. It gave me an admission. So let's go to Mark, and then we'll talk about the employer perspective.
Yeah, and I'm also going to touch a little bit on the employer perspective too, because I've had the opportunity to actually see both sides of the coin, so to speak. But Mo made a good point, value. What is the value of the CCIE? And that's going to depend on from what perspective. So for example, as you as an individual, everybody that goes after some type of CCIE is going to have a different motivation to do so. Some of us are going to do it because in your mind, it's going to dictate a higher pay, right? Very good reason. We all want to be able to take care better of a family. Very good. Others are going to perceive the value to be more in an accomplishment. They have done something that very few people have ever accomplished. We could argue that maybe within the span of these 30 years that the CCIE has been around, if a little bit over 2,000 people a year manage this around the world, I mean, that's a fantastic accomplishment. I mean, I've seen percentages say that maybe 1% of the top earners of networking are really, or not the earners, but the top 1% are the only ones that actually ever pass the CCIE, at least the ones that are, try it, because there's many good engineers, architects, they never take any of the certifications. So let's be honest, and they didn't see that value. And then you're also going to have the employer. Now, depending on who you work for, the value could be monetary for them. It could be meaning that because they have a CCIE on staff, that they're going to be able to retain more business. That's actually something I've seen from my end, where because the customer specifically asked, what type of certified people do you have on hand, that the certification specifically led to a larger project being taken on, millions of dollars. So that could be one perspective of value. Now, what I've also seen in my case is that the employer didn't really understand, though, what the CCIE meant. And this is a very important point, because if your employer doesn't really understand what it is, number one, you may not get support trying to achieve the certification, and you may not even get monetary compensation later on. So you want to keep those things in mind. I went, bent over backwards trying to explain certain things to my employer, and I remember distinctly what really stuck with them. It says, So you're the cream of the crop. Like, we give you trouble, you fix it, right? You figure it out. I go like, I suppose that's what I meant. Not exactly, but we'll go with it. And for them, it meant if there's a problem, it's been long standing, people can't figure it out. We always got the ace up our sleeves. Throw him in there, see what he can do, see if he can figure out. So that's where, for example, my employer saw the value. But to really understand what did it take to, travel. I traveled to Richardson, Texas to take my exam. So I traveled to Richardson, Texas to get to a hotel, to plan for it. Mentally be tough enough not to overwhelm yourself as you take the exam. Then have to sit through what was it, about an hour, I think? An hour and a half, 2 hours, I don't remember. I think it was 2.5 hours troubleshooting. I think half an hour was diagnostic, the way we had, and then 5 hours, whatever it was, for configuration. So it's an 8-hour exam, right? They didn't really understand what it takes. And just like Mo said, it's you're like war buddies with people that have gone through this. You even though it's like, for example, I have not met Mo in person, but all Mo has to tell me, he has a CCIE, and it's a bond we share.
Yes,
it's just there. We know that it wasn't easy, what it took, the sacrifice, the blood, sweat, and tears that it took. So that's something that you just share. But when it comes to the value perspective, and we talk about this many times on this channel as well, is really, how does somebody else perceive it? That's really why you want to get it, right? Any certification, that's really why you want to get it. Because from an employer perspective, this is the experience that I've made as well, because I know Mike has made this too. Some customers love to know that you are certified. CCIE, people revere it. It's like almost legendary status type of thing when you get your CCIE. But I've also come across customers that they don't care. They generally do not care. They cared about if you can either be able to apply technology to a particular business need, if that's the type of position you were in, either as a sales engineer or sales architect, whatever it may be, or what they wanted to know is that you are the person that is qualified to actually fix the trouble that they're having. So you have those customers too. I've actually been told on certain occasions, don't mention that you have a CCIE. Just don't say it. Yep. I've actually had people get combative because they're CCIE. And for those that don't know this, network engineering is not easy. It takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of time. And nobody wants to feel like that their efforts are in vain. And it's very easy to become egotistical in that sense. I'm sorry to put it that way, but that's a fact. We are prideful of what we have accomplished. And let's be honest, there isn't so many of the CCIEs. So somebody like that walks in a room, you're going to get two reactions. Either they're going to be kissing your feet and happy that you're there, because no matter what happens, they at least figure we got this guy up, this guy or girl with us. There's a chance we'll figure it out. And then you're going to have the haters, unfortunately. And the haters could be fellow engineers, could also be customers. Maybe you had a bad experience. So, but when it goes from a value perspective, it really depends who it is. Some employers care, many don't even understand. So they need education. From a personal perspective, you do have to figure out what the value is, because that value is going to dictate if you can actually accomplish your goal of becoming a CCIE certified engineer. And you can also carry that across to others, because there's plenty of other expert certifications, right? We've been discussing many times on the channel the CISSP. That's not cakewalk either. That also takes time, dedication, resources. You also need to be in the right mental state for that to accomplish it. So these are the things that you do need to keep in mind. But that was my experience with the employer, Mike, that really many times either they don't know or they don't care.
Yeah, and let me get to it now. I want to talk about what employers really want. And I want to show you how the CCIE, not because you passed the certification, but what it is about the CCIE that clicks off a lot of checkboxes. Employers, generally speaking, don't care about your certifications. They don't care where you got your degrees from. Here's what they care about. Can you do the job and do it well? I'm going to come back to this. Can I trust you? Do you know what you know, and do you know what you don't know? Are you energetic, enthusiastic, and passionate about the work? And are you willing to go above and beyond? They're my main things that I care about as an employer. So, are you competent? So, look, After interviewing thousands of people, I can tell you in my experience, 3% of people that pass an associate level exam are competent. 3%. I can tell you that when someone passes a professional exam like the CCNP, 1 out of 10 that I interview can actually do the job. When I interview a CCIE, 8 to 9 out of 10 can do the job and do it well. So if I'm going to bring someone in for an interview, I'm going to start with professional certifications and expert certifications. Why? Because I know that about 3% of the time, someone with a CompTIA or an associate level certification or multiple associate certifications, in my experience, can do the job. So 97% of the time they can't. So unless I can interview 100 people to get 3 people that I could consider hiring, I just don't even bring them in for an interview. With a professional certification, it's 1 out of 10. I can interview 30 people to try and find someone cool. I get a CCIE. Okay, and I can't. So I'll tell you, Mark, I brought Mark onto my team. Mark is a network architect, but I knew he could learn anything else too because I knew his capacity for learning. So there's that. So I knew his expertise, but I also knew his ability to learn. So being competent, the CCIE checks off that box. And that is 50% of what employers care about. Next, energy, enthusiasm, and passion for the work. Anybody can go out there and buy a $10 Udemy course, pass an associate certification, not have the skills for the exam and pass the exam, or they can go to any one of the 18 million places where you can buy a copy of the exam, memorize the questions and answers, and pass the exam and still know something. Now, there's plenty of people with no certifications that are great. There's plenty of people with associate certifications that are also great, but I have limited time. But if I see someone that's willing to spend $10,000 to $50,000 a year focusing on a single certification, and I know that they need to spend at least 1,000 to 2,000 hours studying for a certification, I know they care. I know they're energetic, enthusiastic, and passionate about the work because they wouldn't do it otherwise. Again, big checkoff list. I also learned something else about it from the employer perspective. You know, Christina Marino came on she runs an IT recruiting firm, a national one out of New York. I've known her forever. She's the CEO. And she says one of the employers gives her a job description every time. Smart and fungible. So being smart and the ability to adapt to weird stresses and changes when they occur. Well, I got to tell you, the CCIE checks off that box too, because it is so hard. If you're not focused and not intelligent for the most part, you're just not going to pass it. So smart and fungible. Willing to go above and beyond. I will tell you, this is what I did for my CCIE. This is how I prepared for it. And I learn easy and I learn fast. I will tell you that when I got my first job, I already had a CCNP and already had a CCDP, and I had learned a lot. When I got to my job, my manager said, I need a couple of CCIEs in order to have a certain number to get a big discount from Cisco. So my manager said, Mike, coming from medicine, I think you can pass the CCIE. So you're my CCIE guy. I'm like, okay. It was me and this guy, Charles. They were the only who was a CCIE. And I said, okay. And he said, what do you need from me, Mike? And I said, about 10 routers and about 2 to 3 hours each day that I can study. I said, because Devendra, I'll study 2 hours before work, 3 hours during the day at work. If I get home at 6, I will study from 6 to 11 p.m. at night. And I will study from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday if you give me the resources. Devendra did. So for 6 months, I studied 1 to 2 hours in the morning, 4 to 5 hours in the evening, and 3 hours during the day, and 12 hours on Saturday and Sunday. That taught me a lot. But that is not something a normal person would do. I wanted to pass the exam. I had my motivations at the time, and I went, I have to do this. So think about that. That's what the CCIE signifies. The fact that you're willing to do it, that you love it so much you're willing to be crazy and do things that no one else would do. Kind of like someone that gets through BUDS or basic underwater demolition training for SEALs. They start out with 220, 20 people finish. And the people that go in there are pretty strong. So it's the same kind of concept. Weed out everybody but the best. And the best may not be the smartest. The best are the people that are willing to fight, and stay focused until they get their goal and never quit. Who's the best employees to hire? The people that never quit. When you're working on an architecture and nobody's ever figured it out, You're looking for those obsessive compulsive people to wake up at 3:00 in the morning and say, I forgot this, that are checking, triple checking, that are willing to do whatever it takes. That's the hiring manager's perspective of the CCIE. Mo tells you as soon as he had it, they brought him to the US. I can tell you, I went to Wall Street instantly. And then when I was on Wall Street, I got even better offers, but it was just nonstop. Mark worked at a value-added reseller. They generally like it. But it's not the actual certification the employers care about. It's that journey the CCIEs took. It's how they studied for the CCIE. It's the willingness to go above and beyond. That's the secret that you take out of this. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You're going to work on a CEH master because you want to be a penetration tester. The CEH has a written test. That's not that hard. But they got a lab exam, and that's very hard, so it takes the same thing. When it passed the CISSP, I would consider that a medium challenge exam. Really great intro to cybersecurity. I love it. I took it myself. Way harder than something simple like an AWS security exam. You're going to have to be focused and diligent and methodical the same way. Want to build your career? You want to engineering or want to become an architect? It's a new skill. You're going to learn it. Want to be a doctor? Want to become a cloud architect? I promise you can do it. I promise you can do it. Want to be a nurse practitioner and go become a network architect straight up? I promise you can do it. I did it myself. It doesn't matter where you come from, but you got to take those lessons of never willing to quit, going way above and beyond, staying focused, getting the right training from the right people. All good things, all high-paying careers, people don't know what they don't know. That's why people don't teach themselves how to fly an airplane or attempt to. They don't teach themselves how to practice medicine. And they generally don't try to pretend that they're a lawyer without going to law school first. Any of these big jobs in tech that pay $200,000 to $800,000 a year, you need the same approach. Same. Go in there, find the experts, let the experts tell you what you need, get some information from experts, do the research and work on your part, and never quit until you get to your goals. That was the lesson for me. That's the takeaway from the CCIE.
You mentioned something now and earlier too, Mike. It was in regard to research. Research becomes a crucial aspect of even beginning the CCIE. Like Mike mentioned, you don't get there by yourself to a certain extent, right? I've also heard the saying, if you see a frog on a pole, that it didn't get there by itself, that kind of saying. The same with the CCIE. Most CCIEs that I've known, you just heard it from Mike, I think Mo shared the same thing. There a lot of preparation went into it and strategy before you ever sat down and you decided to type in your first command. I know that is something that I myself trained. I know Mike trained himself, that from the very first certification you took, you understood that you needed to have an objective. That objective needed to have a path to get there. So you would plan it out so that you can go accomplish it. And that would include a lot of research in regards to, what do people say that took the exam and that passed it? What were their failures? Why did they fail? And that's where you start learning about these little details in regards to, this is not as simple as I'm going to read a couple of books and then I'm going to sit there for 8 hours on the weekend and just lab. That's an aspect of it, that there is a certain phase that you want to do that. But what about in regards to, how am I going to manage my life affairs? If I'm married, how do I get my spouse on board? If I have a boyfriend or girlfriend, how do I get them on board? If I have other obligations, how do I schedule them so that it does not alienate those people, but that they know that I'm there, that they support me, right? So that they can help me get there. You research these things, you find them out, you see what worked for other people, what didn't work for them. How do you apply that now in your own life? Then other things that you learn is in regards to strategies. What did some people try to up the probability of success during an exam? You might have heard some people say, I kept count of how many troubleshooting scenarios I passed because I had to pass a certain amount. So you will write them down. I've heard others say, when you are in the troubleshooting section, make sure you copy some of the configurations that you work so that you can use them in your configuration section. So those were tricks and tips that you could take along to make your life easier. Something that stood out to me, though, and again, this is the preparation aspect. I probably spent just as much time preparing as I did studying. And that was the aspect of understanding what are the pitfalls as I go for the exam. That's really what it was. I understood there's going to be an aspect of how fast I can type, how much of the commands I remember. Do I remember the concepts? I understood all that. But to me, what was really important was in the research to find out, how did people stay motivated? What is it that it took for them not to go insane? And I genuinely mean this. If you're sitting hours on end, day after day, month after month, and for some, a year or two, it can drive you mad. What did they do to counteract that type of feeling? I wanted to learn that. So that brought me to one aspect. Then I wanted to learn what are things that I can do so that I don't beat myself. If the exam beats me, that is fine, but I can't beat myself before I get there. So things such as, how do you feel the day before when you go to the hotel? How would you feel? Nervous, anxious, excited, frightened? How would you feel? Can I control that? Why? Because if I can control this when I feel like that, I can think straight. That's what I need for the exam. What about when you're on the way to the exam center? What about when you walk in? I distinctly recall the first time I walked into the room and I saw all the tables laid out. I asked myself, how would I feel when I see that? The moment, the big moment coming closer. Can I control that heart pounding, the elevation of my heart rate, the sweaty armpits? Can I control it? How would I feel when I sit down and all of a sudden I get nervous? Can I really do this? Am I good enough? How would I control that? That can be crippling. What about if I don't know something? How would I handle that in that situation? Would I let my nerves get the better of me? Can I think straight? So those are things that I did to research in regards to how not to let the exam beat me before I get there. And as you can imagine, when it comes to mental toughness, this kind of fortitude, that is not written in a CCIE book. I've never read that anywhere. And to me, and then I'll let Mo and Mike chime in. If somebody asked me, what was the one thing that helped you to accomplish this task? I would say it was that I was in control of myself. I did not beat myself. What about you guys? How important do you guys think it is to you, this type of exam success, but also other exams in regards to your mental fortitude, your toughness, the emotional stress that it puts on you? How important would you say that is in even remotely getting close to passing it?
I think Mike would be the best person to answer this question, honestly. I have a lot to say, but Mike will be the best person to answer.
Okay, but you had nerves, right? I mean, you had something.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It was nerve-wracking. I mean, it was very hard for me just to go to sleep. Really, I had to meditate for about an hour just to go to sleep. So it's really nerve-wracking.
Before I answer the question, Mo, I'm going to ask you something. Do you think your experience as a boxer made you tougher to help you pass this exam?
Absolutely. It's the same exact feeling. only was more difficult for me because I made this my career, right? Versus boxing, I was doing it more because I loved it. I mean, I loved the field, but this was my career. So everything was dependent on this.
Everything was dependent. But even in your hobby, did you ever train until you were nauseous?
Of course.
Did you ever train when you were sick?
Yes.
Did you ever get hit in the face and the body during sparring and continue to train no matter how much it hurt?
Yeah, during fights too. You know, sometimes I had to fight with a very minimal concussion once. Not a great idea. I don't recommend anybody to ever do it, but I still went through it and won the fight. But so sometimes you just have to do it, right? Regardless.
That is the key takeaway here. If you are tough enough, I don't care what you want to do, you can do it. You want to get through SEAL training. When you speak to SEALs, they tell you the Olympians don't get through, the professional athletes generally don't get through. They're the ones that are so strong in the mind, they never quit. When you deal with athletes, I had a chance to meet Mo's friend, who's one of the best, top 5 boxers in the world right now. He told me he trained during the day during Ramadan when he couldn't eat or drink fluid. And I said to him, and Mo saw me say it, you will win. And I said, anybody that can train as hard as you need to train at the professional boxer level and not be able to eat or drink because it's a holiday and still do it for 4 hours is a champion. Which he did. He won. But I knew he would. Great guy, by the way. But same thing for me. I was a martial artist. I was an Olympic weightlifter at one point, a power lifter. I knew pain. I knew what it was like to work 16 hours a day, 20 hours a day, because I did it as a firefighter paramedic. And I knew what it was like, okay, I got a goal. I'm going to just find a way to do it. And then no matter how hard it gets, just remember myself. You can take the problem, break it down into smaller problems, get one little win. I mean, it doesn't matter what any win is, but find a win. Some days you're sick, and if you manage, because you've got the flu or COVID, well, I don't want to say COVID, but let's say you've got the flu and you're not able to work that day. That's your win, that you weren't stuck in bed. It's a big win. Other days, it's like, wow, I learned this new thing. I finally figured it out after 3 months. That's your big win. It could be anything that's your win, but the key is to accomplish anything big. And then let's get to some questions. Find what you want to do. Commit it to your mind. See it, feel it, and know you win. If you're like me and you read The Art of War, there's a passage that says win first and then go to war. Win first and then go to war. What does it really mean? It means see it in your mind. Game the strategy. See where your struggling points are going to be and figure out how to win and then go to war. Don't just go to battle. Figure out how first. That's where most people go wrong. They do. When everybody says, just start. No. Know where you're going before you get in the car to go somewhere. Know where you're going before you get on the airplane. Plan it out. And when I promise you, there's going to be days where things just don't go your way. You'll fail along the way too. Now, we can minimize the amount we fail by being careful, but we'll still fail along the way. And guess what? When you fail, figure out what you learned, pick yourself back up, and go for it again. So that's the secret. It can be an exam like the CCIE. It could be going through job interviews. It could be like me and you had a foot injury and 13 doctors said you'd never walk again. And literally speaking, for 7-8 hours a day for almost 8 years straight, a little over 7 years, I went to physical therapy, closer to 8 years actually, until one day I couldn't walk far, but I could still walk. Never quit until you get to your goal. So let's take it to some questions, and feel free to ask a question to me, Mark, Mo.
So we got a question here. I'll read from you, from Elizabeth. She says, I know pursuing the CCIE can be lengthy and expensive. I have my thoughts on that, but we'll get to that. So what are my options? Can each of you share your journey, please? Who wants to go first on this one? You, Mike? Since you probably had the highest expense.
Yeah, so it's going to be somewhat lengthy and expensive. It took me 6 months. Now, that's rare, to be fair. It took me 6 months, but I spent a lot for it. And I was willing to do a return on investment capital model and say, pursuing it earlier will be there. I could have probably done. Now, the reason it was so expensive for me is there's no concept of online training when I started. And thankfully, that was a good thing. I mean, it was a good and a bad thing. Online training has made training less expensive. But the problem is, in those days, the only people that did the training actually knew something. And for example, people reach out to me every single day on LinkedIn. They've got a Udemy course on teaching cloud computing, and they ask me how to help them get their first architect job and teach them cloud computing. And I'm like, wait a second, you've got a course that's out there. So when I started this, we didn't have that problem. You had to be an authority to be training people, which is a big difference than today, where anybody can just open an account and just start teaching things, whether they know it or not. So there was that. I always look at things from a business perspective. Always, Elizabeth James. So if a cloud architect, for example, earns $1,000 a day, if someone tries to save $5,000 to figure out how to do it on their own for the course of a year, for example, and they lose, $200,000 that year because they couldn't earn it because they were trying to save a few $1,000s. Then, that to me was a bad financial decision. So, at least to me, I learned that know what you don't know and know to find an expert and get expert help. So, what I did is literally as follows: studied 3 hours before work, 2 hours before work, 2 to 3 hours during the day at work, and 4 to 5 hours each night. I rented equipment and I took every kind of training you could possibly imagine. I got done in 6 months. And the reason I paid extra to get done in 6 months was because I knew what CCIEs were earning back in 1999 and 2000. And I was in a hurry to get to that $100 to $150 an hour. Because in today's world, that's $200 to $300 an hour. And I was in a rush for that. So I kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Actually, probably more than $300 an hour. Let's go to you, Mark, and I have to check this thing from.
Yeah, so I don't think I'm going to throw Mo off too much because what I did was a little bit unique. And what I mean with that is I really looked ahead and I tried to think to myself, I did my CCNA in routing and switching. I did my CCNA in security because people said security is everywhere. So I figured that'd be a good thing to do. And at that time, my employer was also introducing ASA firewalls, so the Cisco firewalls. So I thought it was a good idea. And I finished off both those examinations and I thought to myself, what is next? Because I felt that if I did what a lot of people did, and this is basically they take an exam, they pass it, they hope they get some money for it, and then eventually if the need arises for it, they go take the next exam, right? So that's generally what people do. And then they try to prep then for the whatever exam they want to take on what resources they need. So I was thinking to myself, okay, security is good, but configuring firewalls just wasn't, it didn't really invoke any specific feeling besides this is a little boring. That's just how I was back in 2016. It just wasn't appealing to me. So I figured, okay, well, routing and switching, based on the work that I was doing at the MSP, I saw we had a lot of circuits, a lot of transport circuits. We were introducing routers, switches. We were slowly bringing in also third-party vendors to provide a layer 3, basically routing VPNs through MPLS. So I naturally knew that I wanted to learn these technologies. I wanted to be good for my customers, either in recommending a solution or being able to troubleshoot the solution with them, or in this case, if I had to call AT&T, Verizon, I would do so if we need to troubleshoot something. So I started thinking about, okay, how would I learn any of these things that are coming about? So I figured there was the CCNP, routing and switching, and there was the CCIE, routing and switching. So from that moment on, when I knew my options, what I ended up doing is I started collecting resources. That's what I ended up doing. So, for example, when there was a sale, let's say on a particular training vendor, let's say they had a great sale, I bought that then. For example, I got 2 years of training for the price of 1 year, snatched that up, saved some money. Then I started thinking, okay, well, what do I need from a technical perspective besides training, right? I need books. Okay, how do I get books? Well, there's this thing it was called Safari Online, right? So now it's called O'Reilly. So I'm like, okay, I think this is better because I'm spending $80, $90 on one book, but here I can, worst case scenario, I spend $400 for the year. I have access to pretty much all of the Cisco press books. Well, guess what? Since I wasn't in a hurry, they had a sale. Locked that one up in the sale too, saved some money. Boom, that was done. Next thing I thought, okay, what do I need again for just if I wanted to do the CCNP? Well, I'm probably going to need some type of routers, switches. So I figured out, how do I do it? Do I buy actual equipment? I mean, we had stuff at work that I could use, but, it was old equipment. So I started thinking to myself, okay, how much would a router cost me? So I go online on eBay, check it out, $100. Okay, not too bad. So how many do I need of them? Well, I don't know. I mean, this is version 5 exam. This is the first exam that they went from physical hardware to virtual hardware. So again, research comes in. What do I find out people saying? You're going to have a lot of devices. Don't be surprised if you have 20, 25, 30 devices on your topology. I go like, I don't think my electric bill right now can support that. And I'm not really sure if my wife would be on board of me turning an entire bedroom into a telco closet. So I'm like, okay, what's my alternative? Okay, I need a server. Okay, so first thing, I'm now scouring for servers. Well, work had a server, so I borrowed that for a little bit until I was a little bit more cognizant of how do you virtualize on a server? I didn't know any of that, so I had to look that up and learn that too. So I figured that out. Sooner or later, though, again, I wasn't in a rush. What did I do? I found a server on sale. Found myself a beautiful server, snatched it up. What did I need next? Okay, well, I got books, I got training. All right. Many people tell me boot camps. I didn't like boot camps. Or let me put it this way. I didn't like the price tag associated with boot camps, which was $5,000, $6,000 a pop, if you're lucky, right? So again, I was strategic about my approach. I started thinking, what would be the benefit of this boot camp? Why do people take boot camps? I learned through what people said. People would take boot camps to gauge their readiness and do some type of final preparation. Okay, well, I'm not in my final preparation. I even take my CCNP. Boot camp's out the window. Chalk that out. Don't have to worry about that. So the next thing, then I started thinking, okay, what is my general day-to-day affair? Like, what time do I have available? And again, I go back to this. I still only passed my CCNA. I didn't start my CCIE, CCNP. This is just my CCIE. I said, what time do I have available? Like, what can I study-wise? So I started thinking, okay, I can probably do an hour every day. It gives me 7 hours a week. Gives me 28 hours a month. So I started thinking, how far would that get me? An hour a day. I said, well, it's better than 15 minutes. It's better than nothing at all. So I said, let me start with that. 1 hour a day. And if I got a little bit more time, I'll do a few more hours on the weekend. So that was done. Then I next had to figure out, do I even want to really pursue any of this? I said, if I'm going to do the CCNP, I might as well do the CCIE. So I said to myself, you know what? Is it really that important to have a certification? And I started thinking, I says, well, depending where you go, they might pay you more money, maybe. And then I started thinking, why do I want to do it? I need to know why. Because if I can't answer that question, I will never follow through with it. I didn't have a why. So I started researching again. What were people's reason for it? Do they make sense? And what I found out over time, I developed levels of why I wanted to accomplish something. But for the sake of time too, one of my biggest things is I just wanted to be great. The certifications didn't matter to me. It was the knowledge, the journey. I wanted that because I thought to myself, if, let's say you study for 3-4 years, what if you did that and then give it a shot, go take the CCIE. It says like, the important part was for me is I wanted to know what I was doing. I needed to know that because if I know what I'm doing, the certification is trivial at that point. Plus, it gave me an excuse because I just didn't know enough about all the certifications. So I bought myself some time studying. But so I ended up doing that. I said, you know what? I want to be great at it. I want to build my confidence. When I talk to customers, when I talk to service providers, I want to be able to engage in intelligent conversation. I don't want to look like a fool, and I don't want to make my company look like a fool. So I began studying. I started in my free time watching videos. That's what I ended up doing. Whatever I didn't know, I started writing it down. At work, if I wasn't on a call, either if it was design related or if it was troubleshooting related, in the background, I was playing videos. So I wasn't 100% focused on it, but I was listening to them. Then during lunch, when I ended up doing this, I decided, you know what? I think people read books for this stuff. So let me read a book. So I did what most people did. I didn't know it better. I figured, okay, well, CCNP is the next thing. Let me take a CCNP book. I started reading the CCNP book. And even when I went to the bathroom, guys and gals, I took a book with me because I could read. That's how I figured I extend my education. So that's how I did it actually for a few years. That was my daily kind of like routine. I would read conceptually, then I would do a couple of labs on the side on the weekend. And because of who I worked for, because of all the different technologies, every little thing that I took, I tried to apply towards it, try to make sense of it. When I had a colleague or a customer, they had questions about these things, it allowed me a way to now take what I've learned and try to apply it. And that really boosted my confidence. It boosted my learning. And aside from that, eventually what ended up happening is that I felt like I learned enough. Now I looked at, okay, what is the CCNP about? At that time, it was 3 exams. I figured, what do I need? I got myself a couple of questions. I specifically went through on what potentially I could be tested on when it came to the configuration. I took a look and said, well, based on what I've been learning, how do I stack up to it? Do I understand anything? So not configuration-wise. Configuration, it's trivial. But for example, if we had 3, we had route, we had switch, and we had troubleshoot back then on the CCNP. I asked myself simply, what's .1XQ? What is that? Do I understand it? If I do, what's the configuration like? And that's kind of how I went through the eventual process. But I'll get back to Mo a little bit, and then eventually we'll get to finish the story. I don't want to go through all this. But just to answer your question, Elizabeth, I took my time. And because I took my time, I did not have a deadline yet that I knew of. It came later on. I was able to accumulate the resources at a discount for myself. So that's how I, over time, actually stretched it. And I had about $10,000 expensive if you really count in all the test questions, the labs I bought, the subscription. I did not do boot camps, but I had other people that I would communicate with. And also, I did consultancy work on the side from my job. So that also boosted a lot of my actual understanding of things and seeing more than just the configuration aspect. What about you, Mo?
Yeah, absolutely. That's I really like the way that you went through the reasoning and how there was some doubt, right? At some point, you have to think about it because it's a really difficult process. You sometimes doubt yourself and you say, is this really for me? Do I need this? Will I benefit from this? Right? And so for me, when I decided to start my CCIE journey, I was 21 at the time. I already had 2 years in the field from the start, meaning from the time I was training people, I was studying, I got my CCNA, my CCNB. And so I was 21, about to hit 22, and I already knew about the CCIE. I heard a lot about it, and it really always scared me, right? That just doing the CCIE, I always thought it's like near impossible because there was only one person who was a CCIE in Libya at the time, and he wasn't even like living in Libya, right? So I wanted to do it, and I wanted to train, do it, basically self-train myself to actually accomplish it. I did not expect it to take this long. It took me upwards to 9,000 hours total as I was logging my time. I averaged 6 to 10. Well, on average, let's say about 7 hours a day, because anywhere from 6 to 10 hours, depending on the day. And I always try to take a day off. I have a very obsessive personality. I'm very competitive. So once I start something, I don't stop. So usually the days off are almost forced, meaning I just break and I'm like, I can't do anymore, right? I'm frustrated with the lab and I'm just spending hours or trying to learn the technology, and I just quit and just go out and go camping on the beach or try to enjoy nature, right? Is what I love to do. And of course I had boxing, which I had to give up because of the CCIE. So that was another reason I said, I'm not going to give this up, because I already gave up something that I really loved, which was boxing. And so this has to work. That's why it was a lot of pressure for me before the day of the exam, because I had the pressure of this has to work, right? There's no looking back. So I passed after around 4.5 years. I did the exam also in Richardson, Texas. So I took 2 attempts, right? And to kind of answer your question structurally, let's say you said how expensive was it, right? Again, it took me 4.5 years. Just training material, it was around $27,000. I used almost every vendor that's out there. I used all the workbooks, right? And mainly I had four of the main vendors for workbooks. One of them is actually Cisco. At the time, they called it Cisco 360. Before then, it was expert level training. They keep rebranding the name because people don't like that training material. Sorry, Mike. I know Mike.
Yeah.
it's from Cisco, but the training that
It
those
had
labs,
some growing to do. Let's put it that way. But it was
Yeah.
pretty good. Pretty good. Just not
the
excellent.
training was okay, but by the time I got to that, I was a little bit underwhelmed because it wasn't at the level of the other training material that I've tried. I went through a boot camp too. I did the boot camp actually twice. And so it was really difficult. And it was difficult because not only was I a full-time student and I had a full-time job that I had to manage, but also because we had a lot of power outages. There was a civil war going on. So it was really difficult. I had to be really resourceful. I had a lot of good friends that helped me. When lights go out, I have to basically drive to another neighboring city just to sit down and charge my laptop. And then eventually I was able to buy a generator and then, be able, and a UPS, and be able to have my own lab running, whenever I needed. So it was really difficult to manage that. And one of the things that CCIE forced me to learn, and even when I was doing my CCMB, because I still had the same problem, is that I broke down the different types of material that I used, right? Which was the books, documentations, and RFCs, so Cisco documentations and the RFCs, right? And then you have the workbooks and the videos. So those are 5 different things. So depending on the time of the day, depending on whether the lights are out or not, depending on whether I'm driving, because when I was driving, I would put the videos in the background and I would just listen, right? And so it depends on the time of the day, I would listen to something different, right? And I had physical books because when the lights go out, I need a book, right? I don't have access to my laptop. So I conserve the energy for when I can watch a video or do labs, right? And so I I studied different things based on the time of the day, where I was, but I was always consuming the material, always. Whether I'm sleeping, I have it on the background before I go to sleep. Whether I'm driving, I have it in the background. If I'm just sitting down and I can just watch videos, I would watch the videos. Books when I have time to study and sit down and read the books. Labbing when I have a chunk of time, minimum 4 hours where I can lab, right? And
now, hold on a second, Mo. I'm going to take a guess here. You were dreaming Cisco, were you not, at that point?
I dreamt about taking the exam many times.
I mean, literally, like dreaming it, right? You're thinking about, okay, how would BGP connect towards here?
Yeah, it was a commitment, right?
Yeah.
And you had to. So that's one of the things, right? If you're married, you have a partner, that is something you really need to discuss with your partner, right? Because I've seen people, it broke relationships, it broke marriages. Trust me, I've heard a lot of bad stories out there. So you really need to manage your time, and people around you need to understand, and what's the value of this? What's the value that will add to your life? Your life personally or collectively, right? And so that's a huge part of it too. So before starting this, you have to look at it and say, and I think Mark was more proactive in that, and he already set all those plans ahead of time. I didn't. I just jumped in head first. And just like I do with a lot of things in life, I just jumped in and dealt with the consequences later. And it did affect a lot of things. I had to, sacrifice a lot of things. And that's I think that the biggest sacrifice is not really monetary. It's time and the relationships that might lose just based on this. I know this is dark and it's taking a dark turn, but it's the reality of the CCIE. Things will change. Your life will change. It's a life-changing event for the good and for the bad. It can be, if you don't structure it well, like Mark and Mike has done. And I haven't done that, to be quite honest with you. But it's absolutely worth it. I recommend it if you have the time, money, well, obviously the time, resources, and if it
the willpower,
you, yes, the willpower, definitely.
Yeah, and I want to address 2 things, and then I'm going to ask Chris for another question. One is, I hope you heard it. Well, we didn't have electric, so I'd go here, and then I'd be able to read. Maybe we had a flashlight or candles. That's the mindset of the people that are the most successful. I personally had to stop my martial arts, which was so not good for me, because mentally that was good for me. But I'm with you. And when you achieve anything great, you're not going to have things in common with your old friends. And as you get, I don't care if you go to medical school, become a CCIE, become a security architect, a cloud architect, all of a sudden when you're there, you'll have more in common with your new people that you meet than the old people from your past life. It's sad, but I think we all experience it at some point. Chris, bring us the next question.
Question from FB. CCNA or CCIE? Which do you recommend?
So I'd like to know what your goals are, FB. If your goals are simply to be an admin and configure routers, the CCNA is a good start. If you want to have some engineering skills, you can either have a CCNA and focus hard and develop really great engineering skills because you want to, or you could do a CCIE, which will give you good, strong engineering skills. But it really depends on your goals. If I was looking to train somebody as an architect, I'd probably tell them to skip the CCIE and to do a CCNP, which is the midpoint between the CCNA and CCIE. Why? Because the architect's not going to build anything anyway. Now, I might tell them to be a CCDE, which is a design expert, which is more like an architect than a CCNA or even a CCIE. So, FB, it's never about certifications. I would actually ask you this. What's your goal career? And then we can figure out the certifications and skills that you need to get there. But I never recommend just taking a certification. Because if you get certifications that aren't aligned with your career, it actually makes you look worse. It makes you look unfocused. And there's plenty of times I have to take certifications off of people's resumes to get employers to take the people seriously. So what's your goal career? You tell me that and I can help you with certifications. But I don't recommend just doing certifications. That's kind of like saying, okay, yeah, I just learned to be a dog walker. I just learned to be an airplane pilot. If your goal isn't walking dogs or being an airplane pilot, then it's not going to help you in your career. So what's your goal? Chris, let's go to the next one.
So from Cruz Martinez, is there a reputable training program for the CCIE you would recommend? Well, it depends what type of CCIE do you want. I can tell you there's more resources for what they now consider the enterprise track than there is for something data center related or service provider. Those resources are going to be a bit more scarce. And I'm going to be honest, there just isn't a lot of CCIEs in the world. I mean, let's be honest. So to be able to find one of them, not to speak a team that can actually train you on the most specific one that you want to go for, it's going to take quite a bit of research to try to figure it out.
Yeah.
So is there a reputable training program? I always say I&E was always very good. There are some things that I personally feel that older stuff was better than the newer stuff, but that's personal preference. I just enjoyed the actual training a little bit more back in the past. But I would definitely say I&E when it comes to training videos. When it comes to books, or like documents in general, honestly, this is a Cisco exam. It doesn't get any better than the Cisco documentation. I mean, you want to learn stuff about it, go read the Cisco documentation and then supplement it with the actual RFCs. That's what I would probably recommend that.
And the Cisco Press books.
Yeah, there are a few. Definitely. Like Jeff Doyle's books are good. The TCP/IP Volume 1 and 2. You want to pick up those. If you wanted to get a little bit better understanding about BGP in regards to the architecture, there's Sam Halabi's book, of course, that you can pick up. There was a book from, I think it was from Narbek Kocharian and from Peter Palou. I think it was the CCIE Official Certification Guide. There was 2 volumes. So that was pretty good because it also helped you with what was back then the CCIE written exam. But I think in general, it's still a very good read because it touches on some things, again, that kind of over-prepare you a little bit for the exam in regards to bringing in ISIS and stuff like that. So those generally what I would say you can go for.
I think they're good suggestions. Kozlov used to have a book. Andrew Kozlov, I don't know if he still makes that book, but there was a relatively good book. And I will tell you, I got some training from Cisco. I'm not going to say it was perfect, but it was helpful. And the places that I went to actually don't exist anymore. But they were actually very good in their days.
Yeah, there's definitely a vendor that I'm thinking of. They're just not around, so there's no point in mentioning them. But they had some excellent instructors. So you can find it on YouTube. Let's just put it that way. All right. You want to go to the next question?
Yeah.
Okay. So from Min Nguyen, great point, Mark. How to stay mentally healthy while attacking this? Well, so I think there's going to be a little different takes on it. I think where we all kind of agree on what we went through is these stages where we didn't really know what our limits were. Like we were, like a child trying to figure out the authority of a parent. We were pushing our limits, and you heard Mo say it. Mike already, we know Mike is when he goes in, he goes in. But I even found for myself is I, in the beginning, pushed myself always to the point where I burnt myself out. So what I learned from that is I wanted to get up to that point, comfortably push to that, and then back off. Because what happened to me is, or most people is, when you just constantly pushing, eventually what's going to happen is you're going to lose your form. In studying, that is your focus, your flow state. And when you lose that, it doesn't matter how you attack it. Eventually what's going to happen, you're going to break yourself. If you do martial arts, if you do any type of physical training, you're going to physically hurt yourself eventually. When you do it this way, what can happen is you can mentally put off the process so much, you can get disgusted with it, that it's going to be difficult to return. So what I personally did is I figured out what my limits were. Every so often, I pushed past it. It's like working out, right? You want to fatigue the muscle enough and then push against it. And then what I did is, and this is popular in working out, I kind of did those, instead of doing 10 reps, when I went back to study, I did 7 reps and kind of saw how many I could do that. Okay, so I figured out, I can only do an hour and a half today. Then the next day, I figured out I can only maybe do an hour, 30 minutes, and so forth. So I always kept studying, but I briefly toned down my studying to allow myself to catch your breath. And I went other things, right? I went to play tennis, soccer. I did things with the family. Even just an hour or 2 extra kind of got me over the hump. But that's kind of like what I did. What about you guys?
Yeah, I took a strategy that is similar to what I did for fighting.
Mm-hmm.
So in fighting, usually what we do is when you're 10 weeks out from a fight, let's say 16 weeks out, you can run long, you can do like long runs, your 10 miles, you can do your very intense sparring, your weightlifting, and then as you get closer, once you're like 1 or 2 weeks out, you increase the intensity, but you lower the duration, right? And you get away from things that are very heavy lifting and things of that sort. And I did the same thing for the CCIE. When I first started, a lot of books, right? I did a total of 27 books for the CCIE. And as can Mike and Mark can attest, these books are 1,000 pages plus.
Yep.
And then you have the documentation and all of that, right? And so as I got closer, I moved from that and more towards documentation, because that's the documentation that you might have access to in the exam. So there's one part you have access to, but realistically speaking, you don't have enough time to go through that documentation. But I made sure to really memorize it and know, instead of Googling it, go to the Cisco website and go through that website and finding the information I want. So I trained myself to find that exactly the information, the configuration information that I needed, in case I needed it, right? And then the intensity was, I simulated the exam, as in I had different workbooks, just as you mentioned, INE, Cisco Expert Level Training, Micronics, which is NERPIC, right? I had different ones too, right? I don't want to just go ahead and just name all the different vendors, but I went through, I created my own labs, and I took those labs and I created my own labs. Basically, I merged it together, different features from here, different features over here, and I started building those different tests, right? But I simulated an exactly 8-hour exam with a 1-hour lunch break, right? And that's all I was doing for the past 60 days, when I was 60 days out, right? So you want to simulate, just out of the boxing match, you want to simulate the fight with the least amount of injuries. You want to simulate that exam with the least amount of, you don't want to break yourself, right? You don't want too much stress that you break yourself, but you want to keep that consistency.
Yeah, and I just remember something, Mike. You okay if I mention it?
Yeah.
I don't know how I could forget it, but it became so natural to me. Mo mentioned that he would listen to various what do you call them now? See, now I'm drawing a blank. Lessons, right?
Yes, at the audio series,
Yeah.
for example. I think that's what you're
yeah. I tried that. And what I noticed is I started zoning out while driving. So that was not good. So I stopped that. So that was the part where I started focusing a little bit more on how do I keep myself motivated? How do I keep my mental health intact? And what I started doing is I started listening to a lot of audiobooks from people like Zig Ziglar. I loved listening to his stuff. Not what is just motivational, but it also improved general communication. There was a lot of sales involved in that. I loved listening to not necessarily help-to books, but like Mike mentioned, The Art of War was instrumental. These were things that I was able to listen to that were not technical, but that continually kind of added a little additional fuel to the fire and kind of gave me a break. So that by the time I was getting to work, I was ready to study, I was fired up because it gave me a reason to keep going. And at the same time, a little bit of a mental break, because there's only so many zeros and ones you can see. There's only so many times you can configure BGP, OSPF. I had EIGRP on my lab, so that was EIGRP, right? So I ended up doing things like that too, things that were not technical that I listened to. And in my case, it was other self-improvement things that I ended up listening to, from sales to marketing, things like that. Just figure I mentioned that.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And Min, when I looked at it in a different way, first thing is I did my CCIE in 6 months. And I invested heavily to do it. And I knew that I could do it in 6 months. You can do anything for 6 months. You can literally survive anything for 6 months. So that was one of the reasons I went so aggressively at it. Having said that, Min, stress is never an issue. It's how we respond to stress that's the problem. Some people can handle this amount of stress, and to them, it's just getting out of bed. I've met other people that have a bad hair day, and they literally need Xanax. And when I literally had a patient came into me one day, and I said, "What, you really stressed?" And the person said, "I have a bad hair day." I'm like, "Yeah, okay." And they're like, "What medication can you give it to me?" And I'm like, "I'd love to get you to talk to someone." "Oh, okay, what? But what can I do right now? I'm going to jump out of my skin." And it was about their hair. And I actually I've seen car accidents where people never should have survived. And they were trying to say, I don't need to go to the hospital. And if I didn't get them to the hospital, they would have been there. So we all have a different level of pain that we can tolerate. I was very lucky, and Mo and I are a lot alike. I did a lot of martial arts. And when I was younger, my martial arts instructor, my sensei, had said to me, "Mike, success is about how hard you can get hit, how much pain you can tolerate, and how to keep going." He said, "Get comfortable being uncomfortable." And we always ran drills to be uncomfortable. I would run until I was sick. I would lift an enormous amount of weight until I felt horrible. I would do anything to push myself to my limit so that I could learn, I did this, I can do a little more. So, but then again, I grew up in a warrior-based environment. So for me, it was there. But for me, that's the key. So stress is not the issue. It's developing a good coping strategy. Maybe it's a daily meditation. Maybe it's yoga. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's you just thinking and doing an autogenic meditation versus a breathing meditation, but finding one way that teaches you how to relax and how to control your thoughts. You know, they refer to it as I think in the Buddhist religion, they call it the monkey mind, which part of your mind that runs amok. For anyone to be successful, we have to control our thinking. Because if you don't, you're going to be in a boardroom and somebody's going to offend you and you're going to say something negative and poof, you lost control. Your career's over. So it really doesn't matter if you get stuck in the wild because you got a flat tire and you got to go walk 30 miles with a sprained ankle. That might be your only option. You've got a CCIE. Or guess what? You want to get your next cloud security architect thing and you need to cram for a couple of weeks to prepare for an interview. And then you get a job which just triples your salary and changes your life, assuming you had the right training in the first place. We can do anything for a short period of time. Anything.
All right, next question is from Roz. CCDE for security architect. Well, let me put it this way to you, Roz. A CCDE is going to have different core technologies included in it. So these are going to include domains from routing and switching, which they renamed to enterprise. You will have security on that exam as well, that are going to discuss security when it comes to particularly the network. There's some discussion briefly on the cloud service providers, not too much on that. And then it's going to be heavy on the data center and definitely service provider engagement. So, and then you can have an elective. Depending on which elective you take, you might have a little bit more security aspects in there. For example, if you go for the new kind of AI elective that they had, there's going to brief things in regards to making sure that data is clean, sanitization, things like that. If you go with large-scale networks, as you can imagine, large-scale networks is going to require a whole different type of security, depending on what type of protocol you have in place as well. You have IoT. So security in general is going to be included on the CCDE. Will it make you a security architect? I don't think so personally. Will it get you there quite a bit? Yes, if you study for it correctly, if you have the right training for it. But be aware of it, that there is a lot more of the business aspects that are not covered when it comes to general certification training that you will still have to pick up. And that's why if you've been on any of our Q&As, that's why we always hammer home so much the point that there is the technology training, and then there's the business acumen training. It says they're separate from each other. And generally speaking, it's that business training that's not focused on a lot, even within a CCD. There's very little of it, but you will have to get additional training from that to truly prepare you to be ready for a career, either as a security architect, if you want to be a network architect, and so forth. That's just my opinion when it comes to the CCD.
Yeah. I want to speak for this point because this is a really, really good point that you just made, Mark, about learning business acumen, right? Learning communication, all those things. They're not going to learn from the CCIE. To be quite honest with you, for somebody who is naturally an introvert, somebody who's naturally more technical, it might make you worse because now you sound like you're speaking a foreign language, right? Somebody would ask you a simple question, an executive, and a CCNA might answer it better than you because as far as they're concerned, you both are speaking a foreign language, but at least because he has a simple understanding, he can probably speak in easier terms, right? And that happened to me, and that's how I found Mike, right? Because I was desperately looking for somebody who's in the field that knows, because you see a lot of people that talk about business acumen, but they're from sales. It's different. It's a different environment. But how can you, it's really difficult to take a technical knowledge. This is not medicine, right? Where, again, medicine is really difficult, but people can relate to it, right? It's more rooted in reality, the way I see it. This is IT, the technology. People don't touch, people don't think about it, right? It's so simple that people deal with it on a day-to-day basis. They don't want to know the dirty work, how it's built, right? They don't want to know the plumbing, how the things actually happen. So it's really hard. I couldn't find anybody, and I looked. I couldn't find anybody that could simplify information. When I found Mike, I did not. I actually reached out to Mike the first day on the live, and I was already sold, right? Because I looked at Mike, I looked at his LinkedIn, I looked at his resume, and I was like, this is the person that I want to listen to, and I think that's the value that it really helped me grow my career over the past year, joining Go Cloud Careers, is having how to simplify the information, how to know speak the business and not be technology focused, because I believe CCIEs are even worse than a CCNA when it comes to relaying that information to the executives.
And it's actually true. I mean, if we look at how do you optimize an architect salary, it's more business knowledge. It's more leadership skills. It's more executive presence. It's more emotional intelligence. It's more CXO relevancy. How do you optimize an engineer's skills? Well, that's a combination of being more technical. Like a CCDE would be great for a design engineer, but a design engineer is focused on the tech and architects focused more on the business and the strategy. I will tell you, Raz7, when I worked at Cisco, one of the VPs at Cisco said, Mike, could you please remove your CCIE and CISSP from your business cards? And I was horrified. And they said, Mike, do you want to be seen as an executive / architect, or do you want to be seen as a techie? I can tell you, your salary is going to be 3 times higher as an executive. What do you want? And I was like, gone, no longer serving me. So kind of keep that about. So understand RAS 7 on the second question. What could you study? Well, first you have to understand you will never become an architect via certifications. You will need to be trained to be an architect. So what certifications will get you an interview and teach you 15 to 20% of the job you need? I like the CCISSP. I like the CISM and a TOGAF. That will give you 20 to 25% of the knowledge you need. Make sure you get the remaining 70%. And those are the certifications I use for architects, for security architects.
Absolutely.
I have the feeling, guys, I don't know how you feel about this. We're probably going to need a part 2 of this discussion so that we can go a little bit into details actually how we prepared. So just keep that in mind, and maybe if everyone likes it, they can just let us know in the chat. But what is the next question? So from James, is a CCIE a lifetime certificate, or has it to be renewed for a certain X amount of years like other professional certificate offerings?
So it's a combination of both, James. So until you have 10 years, you basically have to retest, but it's not a hard retest. It's that qualification exam, which is the equivalent of, say, the Solutions Architect Professional or the Azure Solutions Architect Expert or the Google Professional Cloud Architect. And once you've done this becomes pretty easy, and you basically just retake it every 2 years. And after 10 years, you can be considered a CCIE Emeritus. But it's not a full CCIE unless you do your recertification every 2 years.
Yeah. And Mo, are you okay if I add something to this? Briefly what Mike said?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. So if you've had the unfortunate or fortunate pleasure of trying to keep your CCIE active for 10 years, and then you can pay a little bit of money, and Cisco basically said, okay, we'll keep your CCIE status as emeritus, but you're not going to be considered an active CCIE, right? So that's one of the options. Something that Cisco has done that I personally feel like is great. It used to be that you had to do it every 2 years. And they had you taken the written exam predominantly back then. The written exam was the same exam you would have also taken to be able to qualify to even apply for the practical exam, the 8-hour exam. So they did away with that particular requirement now. And while you can still take I believe it's the encore and basically a concentration, I think you still have to do basically the CCNP to renew. You have the option now of gaining credits. They call them continued educational credits. Oh. So that actually now allows you to kind of branch out from just what you were particularly doing. So depending on what type of certification you have from Cisco, the amount of credits that are required to recertify are going to vary. For the CCIE, last time I checked, it was 120 hours that you were required to gain and then be able to recertify. So you could do that by either taking qualified courses from Cisco themselves. You can pay maybe $900, $1,000 for the course and then take it. Or the alternative, I don't know if Mo's been doing this. I enjoy doing it because it's free. So you guys know I like to be frugal if I can. I take the Cisco RevUp challenges. And that's generally what happens is Cisco gives away certain courses and then says, if you pass this course, you can get credits that get applied towards your recertification. You can do that. Or if you want to pass any type of practical expert exam, so if you want to take another CCIE, you can do that. You recertify. If you also wanted to take what I personally probably would do next is take the CCD written towards the preparation for the practical exam, you can do that. It will recertify all your CCIEs. And the nice thing is, and I'm actually happy this happened, it's not every 2 years now, Mike. Cisco is growing soft on us. They tell us every 3 years now that we only need to recertify.
See, the easier it gets. So that's good. We're gonna answer the rest of the questions, and maybe we do a second day like Mark said. But I want to get to Alita's question. Cisco asked me to remove the CCIE and CISSP from my business cards because I was in an executive architect role. Here's the thing. The CCIE is an engineering certification. Architects are not engineers. The whole point of having an architect is to design a system to improve your client's business performance. I'm going to say it again. Designing a system to optimize your client's business performance. And while we're at it, join us for the How to Become an Architect webinar on Thursday. It's free. My team will pop a link to do this, and we'll cover the architect role even more. So if your whole purpose is to optimize business, and people see you as a business expert, now you're a $500,000 to $1 million architect. If people see you as an engineer who kind of is like an architect, which is a techie, now you're at $150,000 or a $200,000 job, or even a $250,000 job max. And the reason is people with business acumen earn far more. A senior director at Cisco earns about about $550 a year. A senior director at Palo Alto earns about $550 a year. A senior director at IBM earns $400 plus a year. So when you start looking at that and you start looking at the principal architects and the distinguished architects, it's more about our ability to transform a business, not our ability to be techie. So when one of the VPs at Cisco said, Mike, you just left that technical architect role, you're now in an executive architect role. Are you sure you want to show the world that you're a techie? He said, because if you're a techie, you're going to stay here. But if you're going to become an executive, come up here. So here's the thing. It is wonderful to do it, but, you know, kind of keep it in the back of your mind. Where do you want to be seen? What is the brand you're building? If you're building the brand up as an executive, go out there and be treated and be seen and have executive skills. If you're building to be seen as a techie, go out there and go do it. So I totally recommend you do it. If your goal is to be an engineer, if your goal is to be an architect, be careful. It'll be useful in the beginning of your architecture career. And at some point in your architecture career, you're going to have to shift people from thinking you as the techie to the business executive. I had to do it. Mark had to do it. Mo had to do it. We all have to do it. And all three of us love the tech. I mean, we really love it. So it's a constant trap for us, not trying to be the techie. And you stick me and Mo together, I'll tell you, we were in Orlando and he was telling me about his east-west traffic inspection thing that he did on AWS. And it was the most creative thing I've ever seen. But when we get to our clients, hello, how are you today, sir or ma'am? It's a totally different hat. Let's go to the next one.
Try to explain
Mike
what east-west
is
means.
Yeah, Mike is the only CEO that was able to talk at that technical depth and actually go for a conversation for hours, you know, about a certain topic. So, you know,
thank you.
Always the opportunity. You can't
It's
miss
a rare
out.
thing. All right, what's the next question from Halavath? Should we need to get a physical lab for CCNA and CCIE? Mo, you want to answer that one because you had quite a bit of resources. What's your take on this?
For the CCNA and the CCNB, I did have a physical lab. I had 5 switches, 3750X catalysts. I had a few routers, and then what I did at the time, I was using GNS3, and I used an ISL trunk because that was the only trunk that supported. Plugged it into my laptop and did a trunk, and then did sub interface, and I built a whole lab where I had about 12 routers, virtual routers, connected to my physical switches. That's the setup I dealt with it. And I think it was a great chance to early on to learn, to actually be able to build that and deal with some virtualization. And also you add to that dealing with physical switches, right? So I think early on, it doesn't hurt to have switches, but you really don't need it, to be quite honest with you, right? Because at this point, at the time, we didn't have this, but now we have what Cisco calls the IOSV, is their VMware machines or virtual machines that actually simulate most of the switching traffic, right? But at the time, because the image that you take from the switch, you put it on a virtual machine, right? That was supposed to be on a hardware switch, right? And so a lot of the signaling protocols were actually sent on the ASIC, on the line card. So you lose all those signaling or protocol signals. You lose those when you virtualize it. So I needed that to have a switch in order to actually have the full feature set of a switch, right? But you don't need that anymore. I think you have EFNG or GNS3, some sort of virtualization method, and you have the right images or the virtual machine images, you can do everything virtual. And it costs you virtually nothing, right? As long as you have a good enough machine or laptop, right?
Yeah, so you'd be much better off actually getting a server as opposed to buying devices. Look, you know, if you're working at a company and you need to test a configuration, you're going to use EVENG. And it's the same operating system that runs in a virtualized environment. So get yourself a server. practice the things on the server. And then while you're at it on that server, do some other stuff. Maybe you've got a desire for some cloud. When you're done using the EVENG, break it down, build the cloud on your server, install a VMware hypervisor or a KVM or a QEMU hypervisor, set up some virtual machines. So if you want to be an engineer, use some of the firewalls, create something, and then set up a Kali Linux virtual machine and go hack it. So with the server, you've got a lot of options that you can do other than just networking. You can create multiple virtual machines for multiple training things, and you can get a lot of experience. So, when I was younger, I actually brought in special power into my house. I had to bring in several extra air conditioners in my house because I love networking so much, and I was crazy enough to go have a house full of routers and switches. Oh, you can't imagine. I had a special power coming in. My house sounded like a jet engine. My wife's a saint. But there's no reason to do it in today's world. Half of the world is virtualized networking anyway, so you might as well work with a virtual machine-based network like you would do if you worked at a company. And even the exam is done on virtual networking. So, the CCIE, so don't buy stuff that you're going to have to figure out how to sell later. Just use EVENG as long as you have access to the images. If you don't have access to the images because you don't have a Cisco license because you don't work at a company where they have a license, it might be cheaper to go on buy a rack on eBay than it would be to buy the licenses to the software. So think about it that way.
And to bring us full circle and just add one more thing. The other question, do you need a lab for the CCNA? I would say absolutely yes, right? And there's emulation, there's simulation. Simulation is like Packet Tracer, very lightweight. It's good. If that's all you have, Packet Tracer will be the cheapest, easiest option. So you do need labbing, even for the CCNA, if you really want to understand how things work.
Okay. Now, I was told there's a second part to this question. So could we put that one up and then we'll address it? I'll give you also my take on the lab idea.
I think we got to that. The question was, should he use real routers or simulated routers for the CCNA or CCNA?
Was that it?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll just briefly, not to rehash it, but there's some things I want to make clear to everybody is if you have no experience when it comes to networking, I would definitely suggest you use Cisco Packet Tracer in conjunction to an actual server where you can actually load a hypervisor on it to allow you to emulate the actual topologies. The reason I mentioned Cisco Packet Tracer for you guys, and then we'll get into how many hours should I put into the CCIE, is if you have no experience, you can use Cisco Packet Tracer to learn in regards to the cabling, how devices are cabled, why you would use a crossover cable or not. And this is going to help you appreciate also what the difference between a bridge and a switch is, how a collision domain is going to impact you as well as broadcast domains. You'll learn little things like that by using Cisco Packet Tracer because you can manually actually try to kind of wire them up. And believe it or not, that's probably as close as you'll get to wiring anyway as you try to perceive or go towards your CCIE. I've never racked it. Well, have I racked and stacked? Maybe once. That's it. But that's what I recommend. When it comes to actual emulation, this is what I would suggest as well. Same thing, get a server, but do yourself a favor. Cisco, a few times a year, has sales. You go to the Cisco store, you keep an eye out for the personal edition of Cisco Modeling Labs. Once it goes on sale, you might get $20 to $50 off. You purchase it roughly for $150 to $175. Not only do you actually get an emulation environment such as EVENG or let's say GNS3, the wonderful thing about that part license that you purchase for this year or that you rent is you get the images from Cisco. Those would include the actual iOS V images. And also what recently Cisco added is you're going to get what they call the IOL images. That's basically iOS over Linux. So those are going to be lightweight images that you can run. And then on top of that, they did include finally the IOXE images, which also going to be running over Linux. So basically it's form factor. But what's really good about that is as you go towards your CCIE studies, you're going to have certain images to support certain features. So that's where now having the addition from just standard Catalyst OS what is it called? OSI, right? Is that what it's called? I keep forgetting.
It used to be called iOS for the routers
iOS.
and iOS for the switches.
Yeah, iOS, exactly.
That's going back a long time.
Yeah, so besides just plain vanilla iOS, you also have ISXE, which will give you the ability to do some additional things that you couldn't do in that. So, Mike, do you want to chime in on how many hours?
I want to get to this, and this will be the last question we get to,
Okay.
and then we'll talk about some free stuff we have to help people.
Okay,
so,
great.
How many hours do you put something in until you have enough knowledge to pass? And, here's the thing. Every one of us all learns at a different rate. Every one of us all studies at a different level of efficiency. I can tell you, I've sat with Mo. He's terrifyingly smart. I did my CCIE in 6 months. Mo did it in 2 years. I had a little more time that I was able to dedicate it to it. I don't know. But the point is we both got to the same place. So how do you do it? Mo mentioned reading 27 books that are each 1,000 pages long. Actually, they're more than that. They're probably 1,300 pages on average. So 27 times 1,300 is, if I do the math in my head correctly, that's about 40,000. Now, in addition to that, he read the Cisco documentation, the RFCs. That's 50, 60, 70,000 pages of reading that he did in addition to all the labs he did. I'm a fast reader. I would read a book in a single day and then reread it 2 or 3 more times, so I'd spend 3 days with each book. I learned that when I used to learn how to practice internal medicine. I learned how to read fast. So that's my strength. Now, that may be my strength is reading, but I may be completely disorganized by nature. So I've got some other set of things that I have to deal with. But the real key is we all learn at a different rate. Some things come easy for you. At one point I was doing triathlons in my youth. I'm a big, strong guy. That's my nature. Learning to run more than 3 miles was horrible for my body. Deadlifting 700 pounds was nothing for me. Because I'm built to be big and strong, and I'm not built for endurance. I did it. Yeah, I rode those 100-mile bike rides and did those 25, 30-mile runs. I did it, but it wasn't natural for me. So it took me a year to get to where other people were able to get to in 3 months. It's not my nature. So the key is, do you. You be you. You might get through it in 1,000 hours of training. You might get through it in 3 hours of training. Just be you. And instead of worrying how many hours somebody else took, figure out what you do better than anyone else. Because at some point, what's the whole point of doing this? It's to improve your career, to improve your salary, and increase your options. And let's say Mo is now more technical than me, because he probably is. He's closer to it. I focused more on the business. That's my skill. When I was younger, Mo and I were probably the same tech. But me, Mark, and Mo. But, I've had to focus on the business side of things, which is where my natural inclination was. And I realized early on in my career, through some coaches and managers, they're like, Mike, you can compete with these guys to the best of them, but your strength is your ability to lead, your ability to communicate, your ability to present. So my management said, Mike, I think you should focus on that. Let some of this tech stuff get 10, don't go anymore. Keep what you have. Even if you lose 10, 20%, who cares? You focus on this. Because that was my special strength. Maybe somebody else's special strength is they love the tech so much that they can be like super geniuses with it. That's fine. But play to your strength. Use what you're good at and figure out a way to show the employers and anybody else that's looking, why you? What can you do for them? What can you do better or differently than anybody else in the world is going to make them succeed? That's your secret. That is that unhidden superpower. We all have them. So instead of worrying how many hours, I'm going to tell you, it's going to take a lot. Is it going to take 1,000 hours, 2,000 hours, 3,000 hours? It's going to be based on how fast you learn. I think minimum is going to be in the 1,500 hour range. But quite frankly, it could also go into 5,000, 10,000 hour range too, based upon, the way or the process you learn. Concepts go straight into my head and I don't forget them. Figuring out how to do stuff, well, that's not my brain. So all my time after I learned it quick and I had to go figure that stuff out. Other people are good at this stuff, but they don't learn it. So as well, it's a different concept, but we all can get there. The key is remember, you can do anything. You can be anything. As long as you have the right plan, the right level of focus, get the right level of training, and don't quit on you until you win. The biggest thing that holds people back is they quit on themselves. Don't quit on you. While the things you can achieve are incredible. So I think we'll end on that. But, and here's the big but, let's talk about some free things we have for you. Please join us on Thursday on a how to get your first cloud architect job webinar. We'll go over what the architect is. We'll actually discuss the real architect skills, which I promise you are different than most people think they are. We'll discuss how to not get auto-rejected by HR, how to get hired when you're new to the world and you can still get hired. We'll discuss the right skills, and we'll discuss why they're the right skills. We'll discuss what employers are looking for. And then, whether you're with us or somewhere else, the modules that you need to learn to get to your architect goal. It's completely free. It's on Zoom. We can ask questions. I usually have one of my more technical staff with me as well for the technical people, as long as some other business executives. So join us, completely free. We are also going to do some AWS bootcamp training. It's going to be certification, which is completely different than what we do in our jobs, but certifications help you get an interview, and then having the right skills is what gets you hired. We were going to run a completely free bootcamp. It has got a lot more than it ever did. Mo and Benedict added some extra networking things. I added some of the AWS advanced security things. We added almost all the new AWS machine learning things. We have about 3 times the content from previous boot camps because we previously made them for architects. We want to make sure that engineers and others can benefit greatly from this. And my team is creating a whole bunch of labs as well for you guys. So please register, and it's completely free. Tell a friend, share it with a friend. We want to make sure anybody can access to this free training. And, we've got a lot of free documents in the description of this video. How to get your first cloud architect job, mastering the interview, just so many things. Go to the description of this video, look through the description, register for things like how to get your first cloud architect job ebook. There's so many of them out there, and they're all free. So go get them. If you enjoyed us today, please give it a like and subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new videos. I personally want to thank Mo for joining us today. Mo is an extraordinary network architect. I mean, really incredible. One of the best of the best. And when he shares his expertise with our community, I love it. You guys all know Mark. He's great, but he works for us. Mo just decided to, share his experience with you. So, Mark, thank you for sharing your CCIE experience and sharing always what you do with our community. Mo, thank you for joining us today. And if you haven't seen the AWS Advanced Networking, guess what? We released a new one. Mo was one of the primary instructors there. Benedict from our team, another awesome instructor. And of course, I got to teach it as well. And we all love networking. And Mark taught it too. And Mark did behind the scenes labs for you. They're all awesome. Go see it. So all free. So thank you so much. Perhaps we'll do a second one of them. I'll talk to Mo and Mark and see if they desire to, based upon some requests from the chat box and some thoughts from Mark. And have a wonderful day. Take care, everyone.